and had become an atheist. So my path is exactly the converse.
Yeah, we are the direct antithesis of each other, aren't we?
That's right.
Like I was a believer for 30 plus years. How many years were you an atheist? The direct
About that,
antithesis
maybe
of
a
each
little
other.
more, maybe more than, well,
Wow.
I spent a long time as an agnostic where I really had no idea what was real. But no, the first 30 years I was an atheist. I would say the first 20 years I was a very militant atheist. So I was beyond where you are now. I was absolutely sure that there was no God, could not be a God, and should
Uh,
not be a God.
so you were one of those atheists who lived by faith, as far as it's a faith statement to say there is no
Yes,
God, right?
yes, it was. It was part of my faith. I grew up with the faith of communism, which was from my parents, and part of that faith is a very, very strong atheism, which also includes strong antipathy to religion.
We are live now, just to let you know.
Okay, all right.
So people who just showed up in the chat, we just started, so you haven't missed anything. We're just talking about how Garte, is it Garte or Garte?
Guard is fine.
But what is the correct pronunciation?
I don't know. I've used both. I lived in Italy for some time, and there it was Garte, of course.
Okay,
But Gart is what I usually use.
okay. Um, so yeah, we were just talking about how Sai is my nemesis. My he is my reflection. He's the antithesis. I was 30 years Christian, left. He was 30 years a hardcore atheist and left. And by the way, I considered myself a militant Christian, even though I was raised Mennonite. It's kind of ironic.
Right.
The onward Christian soldiers.
Right.
I I kind of preached, even though I wasn't a pastor. Like when I saw someone sin, I let them know it.
Mm,
I was that
yeah.
guy.
Right.
Although, as you know, as you mature, life kind of kicks you in the gut, and you kind of learn to pull it back a bit.
That's true.
What
That
was
is true.
what was it like having communist parents?
Well, it was interesting because I grew up in the 50s. I'm a baby boomer. I was born right after World War II. And in the 50s, being a communist was virtually illegal.
Hmm.
And it was very dangerous to have a child who might know that you were a member of the Communist Party or had been members of the Communist Party. So I wasn't told that till much later. But I did absorb the ideology uh, of Marxism, which included strong anti theism. As a child and as a teenager, I held on to it for quite some time.
How did your parents become communists? What were your grandparents like?
Oh, that's interesting. Actually, my grandparents were communists. I have my family includes founders of various unions back in the turn of the last century. I had one great uncle who fought in the Russian Revolution. I mean, it's a I had four communist grandparents as well as two communist parents. So it's a family tradition.
Family tradition.
I mean, I have said in the past that I grew up in a very religious home. The religion was Marxism, and it was very much a religion, except there was no God involved. But all the negative aspects that we associate with, certainly you associate with Christianity and dogmatic religion, were present in that. There was a saint, there was a dogma, there was all the
Yeah.
there were heresies,
But you know what's
all of those things.
but you know what it's amazing about this is it shows the power of how we're raised and how that
Mm-hmm.
influences our what we believe later in life. But you and
Yes.
I are probably the best people in the world because
I
because in
think you're half right.
because in spite of how we were raised,
Referring to you.
Oh no! Stop. But because in spite of how we were raised for generations and
Right.
generations, we changed our minds.
That's right. That's right. No,
And
I think that's important.
yeah, and it's quite amazing actually, especially in later in life, to make a worldview shift in your
Yeah.
30s and 40s. Like that's almost unheard of. I don't know. Maybe we're in the 2 or 3 percentile, but I want to talk about biologos a little bit, and then
Oh,
and
great.
evolution, and then God. We'll save the best for last.
I was just at a Biologos event 2 days ago.
Okay, I gotta say, I love your that Biologos website. I absolutely love it, and I refer a lot of Christians to that website whenever I'm talking about evolution.
Great.
The one video on genetics is just phenomenal.
Hmm.
I just what was your what is your relationship with Biologos exactly? Were you on the board or something?
No, no, I don't have a formal one. I was an early supporter and participant in the Biologos forum, and I was uh, somewhat involved in some of their early um, work related to a grants program they had. I helped them set that up because I my work at NIH was involved with grants, so I knew a lot about the technical details, and I helped them with that. I've also participated in their forum a little less recently because I've gotten busy with other things, but I've just had and I know all the people there and have supported them over the years.
So that's how you know Randy.
But no, actually, Randy, I know through the American Scientific Affiliation, the ASA, which is another organization that you might want to be familiar with. That's an organization of Christians who are scientists. And unlike Biologos, it does not take any position on evolution or creation. But the truth is that most members these days are evolutionary creationists. And
Okay.
Randy had been the executive director of ASA for a long time. He recently retired as well, but we remain friends.
Um, yeah, I love the website. I refer a lot of Christians there. I'm kind of discouraged to be honest because I've given up talking with Christians, young Earth creationists about
Mm-hmm.
evolution. I try, but I give up pretty quickly, and I refer them to you guys. So I hope that's okay. But you guys are probably
No,
sick and
that's
tired of it too.
no, actually, we're not. I mean, not, in addition to Biologos, there's a Facebook group, which I'll plug, called um, Celebrating Creation by Natural Selection, CCNS. And that's a group also of mostly evolutionary creationists, although we have some atheists and we have some young earth creationists as well. And we discuss these issues often, and it can be frustrating. But I've been finding recently, especially on my Twitter feed, that most young earth creationists who I encounter are willing to talk about evolution in various ways. There's a little less, I see a little less rejection of people who accept evolution than there used to be. And I think that's a very positive sign. I the only thing that actually bothers me about young earth creations, about YEC, is when they claim, and very few of them now do so, but some still will claim that if you don't accept the biblical version, what they call the literal version of creation in Genesis 1, that you cannot call yourself a Christian.
Yeah.
And that is not a majority view by any means. I think there are a few people who still hold to that, and I find that objectionable. But otherwise, I just think, people believe what they believe for various reasons, and it's worth discussing all of these things. It's worth having the conversation. And some people change their minds and others don't. But I think eventually you know, God's truth will come out, and God's truth is cannot be divided into two different portions, where the Bible is one kind of truth and science is another kind of truth. They both have to be the same God's truth, and how to merge those, how to reconcile those. is the challenge that we have.
I I interviewed Mary Schweitzer and
Yeah.
Randy.
Hmm.
I don't know if you watched that, but I asked her, Mary, the question, do you believe in evolution? And she
Hmm.
said, no, I accept it as true.
Absolutely right.
And I
It's
love
not a
that.
belief.
Yeah.
No, I that's my answer all the time.
So I'm going to ask you a question now, but I don't want you to answer it yet.
Okay.
But the question is, do you believe in God or do you accept it as true? So that's something to think about. So in other words, I'm for the remainder of this interview, I'm going to sort of pit God and evolution in parallel boxes,
Okay.
but not yet.
All right.
I want to talk more about evolution first, as far as helping me help others. What do you think is the best piece of evidence I could give a young Earth creationist? Like, is there a go-to that you use?
Well, there's so much specific evidence in from so many different fields that you have to pick and choose what you want to use. Since I'm a molecular biologist and have done a lot of work in genetics, I like the genetic evidence the best. I think
Yeah,
it's extremely persuasive. And what I find interesting is that the young Earth creationists have come up with some young Earth creation scientists, I should say, people who claim to be scientists supporting young Earth, have come up with some propositions that are simply untrue. One of those is that uh, there can't be any new biological information because all mutations are harmful, that kind of thing. That's simply not true. It's a falsehood. And it could be demonstrated in the lab easily. And the other piece of information that's a little less untrue, but still not really correct, is that while they accept microevolution, which I actually think is interesting that they do, they claim that there's no explanation for how large changes, what they call macroevolution, can occur. And that's not true either, because there are two ways that macroevolution can occur. One is just by lots and lots of microevolution. Uh, there may be two species that diverge initially and seem very similar to each other, and then as time and geographic isolation goes on, they get further and further apart, and before you know it, you have a new species and macroevolution. But we also are now learning, in addition to that, that there are genetic molecular mechanisms that can produce very rapid changes, very dramatic alterations in body plans, in function, that can happen within a couple of generations in some cases. An example of that very quickly is a whole genome duplication, and we know that at the start of the vertebrates there was a whole genome duplication event where the entire genome was duplicated, so that all of a sudden there was a tremendous amount of extra DNA that could be mutated at no cost, but that could provide lots of new information. And
yeah.
that one of the results was the vertebrates. So that could have happened very rapidly, not slow millions of years, but perhaps within thousands of years.
See, but I think the
So we now
problem,
know that there are mechanisms. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I think the problem though is it does take some scientific background to understand this stuff, and
Yeah,
so
in
for
detail. Yeah.
for a person who was, let's say, raised in a young Earth creation type family or worldview,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost next to impossible to. It's almost like you have to lay down a foundation beforehand so they can even
Mm-hmm.
understand the evidence.
Well, see, I never do that when I talk to young Earth creationists. What I do with them is, and this may be hard for you to do, but what I can do is say the idea that evolution is atheistic is wrong. The idea that evolution goes against the concept of God as creator is wrong. I think of evolution as God's way of creating. And I can back that up because if you're talking about intelligent design or something like that, that we now we have software engineers who tell us that the best way to design a really complex system is by using selection, trying lots of things and see what works the best. So that's what evolution is. It's variation, and it's selection of the most fit variants. And so if God is the intelligent designer, he's a lot more intelligent than we are. And evolution is actually a very convincing way to me for God to create the diversity of life.
Have you ever met someone who believed in evolution via common descent and then changed their mind towards young Earth creationism?
I don't. No one's coming to mind. I might have seen a commenter once who said that, but I can't
Yeah,
be
because
sure.
that
It's
happened.
pretty unusual. It would be unusual.
It is unusual.
I've seen a lot of the reverse. Many of my friends have gone through the reverse situation where they were yeks, and either through biologos or reading Francis Collins' book or just doing more research, they realized that it wasn't a viable scientific hypothesis, and so they began to embrace evolution.
Yeah, I've talked to maybe one or two people where that's the case. At least
Mm.
they've said that, hey, yeah, I believe in evolution, but I became a Christian, and now it's young Earth creationism.
Mm.
What do you think is happening there when someone actually starts? Let's take them at their word that they did accept evolution as true and then change their mind.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that they're just putting blinders to the evidence, or do you think they're actually seeing the evidence in a new way and they're doing
I
their?
think I don't know because everyone's different, but my guess would be these are people who didn't have a strong, firm grounding in the science of evolution to begin with, possibly. And then the incredible joy, which I felt also, of finding Christ. If they did that in the context of a young earth creationist congregation, for example, they might easily just go all the way and say, I'm not going to hold on to this because I want to be part of this wonderful new experience of being a Christian.
Yeah.
That's my guess, but I can't speak for anyone like that because I don't.
Yeah, you're talking about the this social influence.
Right. And the fervor, when I first became a Christian, which was maybe 20 years ago, when I knew I believed in God and when I knew that I was following Christ, I didn't want to join a church because I was afraid, which turned out to be silly. But at the time, I thought that if I joined a church, I would be subjected to that. And I thought I was the only Christian who accepted evolution. I didn't know there were others at that time. Simply because I was, following media and online versions. When I actually did join, I joined a Methodist church, and shortly after I joined, the pastor asked me to give a little workshop on evolution, and I was quite nervous, and I prepared lots of material, and
Did you
I
wear a
thought there'd be
bulletproof
5 or 6.
vest?
I would have if I'd had one. And I expected maybe 5 or 6 people to show up and all of them to be hostile. Instead, there were like 50 people came, and they were all. One of them wasn't quite sure that he accepted evolution. The rest already did.
Okay, so it was.
So much for that. So of course, this is suburban Maryland, and there are areas in the country where you won't find that, where many churches will be more hostile. But I think that's going to change.
Okay, I want to get into the juicy good parts now.
Okay.
But I do want to say that I'm a little disappointed that I'm feeling like I'm third fiddle because I've seen a couple other live streams you had with other people, and so I don't want to ask you the same questions that you've already answered and that I know the answer to based on those other live streams.
Okay.
But there's probably some people here who haven't seen your answers or heard your answers.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
But I'm going to ask it. I'm going to ask you questions about what you believe and why, but in a very different way than you've ever been asked before.
Okay.
And I think it's going to feel strange, but since you have a PhD in biochemistry and since I have a master's in analytical chemistry, we have this bond between us that we're both these chemists who appreciate the scientific method. We appreciate actually putting things on the spotless, clean chemistry laboratory countertop and
Right.
and and observing things and analyzing
I,
things.
I bet when we both have experiments that don't work, we both say it's the problem with the water, right? Did you ever say that?
Yeah, there's too much calcium in the water.
That's it, right?
By the way, I was the best in my class at getting down to 1 part per million on my analysis.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
but I had the pressure of pleasing my uncle, who's the dean of science. How many years have you been a Christian now?
Well, I've been a member of a church, at which point I was baptized, only about 5 years.
5 years.
Right. I am now the lay leader of my church, so it's been quite a rapid.
But you still have a lot of atheist friends, I'm assuming.
Oh, for sure, absolutely.
Okay, so what I want you to do is, I want you to think in your head right now of one of your closest atheist friends.
Okay.
Okay, you're thinking of one?
Oh, yes.
Okay, can I get that person's first name if you're comfortable giving it? Just first name?
I think I'll make one up if
Okay,
that's all right.
sure.
Eileen.
Eileen. Okay. And so the way we're going to do this is this is a experiment we're running here.
Okay.
So Sai, you're now Eileen. You are Eileen.
Right.
And what we're going to do in our laboratory is I made up common reasons why people believe in a God or Jesus.
Okay.
Since you're a Christian, we'll say Jesus is God, God is Jesus. And here's a whole bunch of reasons that I put on these sticky notes. And since I was raised on a farm, I got a John Deere hat. It's green, so the green screen is covering it. But I'm going to put all these reasons in the hat. Okay? And Eileen, so now all these reasons we've sucked out of Sai. So
Okay.
not only are these representing the reasons, these are Sai's reasons for belief, but they're no longer in Sai. We've separated the belief from the individual named Sai.
All right. Okay.
So technically, if Eileen, if you and I were to ask Sai, do you still believe in God? He would have to say no, because all his reasons are no longer within him. They're in the hat. They're in the hat. Okay? Does that make sense?
Well, I'll go along with it for now.
So Eileen, and when we talk about Sai, let's use Sai's name. Let's show him respect.
All right.
Let's not call him or he. It's Sai this, Sai that. So Eileen, would Sai say that he believes in God or he knows that God is real?
I think he would say he believes in God.
Sai believes in God. So Eileen,
Yes, I believes in God.
So Eileen, Sai would say that he has a little bit of room of doubt that he might be wrong. Is that right, Eileen?
I'm pretty sure that's true. Yes,
Okay.
knowing him as I do.
Okay. So Eileen, let's pull these. We've taken all of Sai's reasons for believing in God and we put them on the chemistry bench, and let's analyze them together. And so I'm just going to, at random, I'm going to pull one out. I don't know if it's going to be a reason that Sai likes, but Eileen, you can tell me since you know him so well.
Mm.
So the first one is fear of hell, fear of wrath. Eileen, do you think Sai believes in God because he actually believes that there's a hell or that there's some judgment coming for him personally, and that's why he believes?
I know that he does not because he's told me that he does not.
Okay, so if we were to stick this belief, this reason for believing back into Sai, it wouldn't influence his belief at all. It's not a reason
No.
why he believes. Okay, so we can throw that one away.
Right.
Okay, very good, Eileen. You're looking very good today, Eileen.
Thank you. How do you like my beard? That's new.
So, Eileen, yeah, 3 words, Eileen, just for men. Okay, Eileen, does Sai believe because of miracles? If we were to put this belief of miracles back into Sai, would he believe in God again?
I think so. Yes.
So if we were to actually we're chemists, so let's.
He hasn't talked about that much, but I'm inclined to think that he does believe in miracles.
Okay, so let's quantify this. I'm an analytical chemist. I need a number. So
Okay.
if like we removed all Sai's reasons so right now Sai is an atheist, but we're putting them back in one at a time. If 51% is just over the threshold to believe again, it flips the switch of belief on. Would miracles get him over 51, or what number would it go from 0 to what?
I'm not sure it would go over 50. I would say maybe 35.
Perfect. Okay. Okay, Eileen. Oh, here's an interesting one. I don't even know what it means, to be honest. But one of the reasons we pulled out of Psi and put on the counter here is something called faith.
Uh-huh.
Eileen, do you know how Psi defines faith?
Uh, I do not, but I'm pretty sure Psi does.
That Psi does what? Knows how to define.
Does define faith. And I know he knows how to define it, but he hasn't really discussed that with me.
Okay. Is faith? Yeah. Too bad Psi isn't here. But let's say I heard actually Psi talk the other day, and he mentioned faith is believing something with 100% without 100% proof. Does that sound familiar, Eileen?
That's absolutely sounds familiar. Yes.
Okay, so it's believing something without 100% certainty or proof. So if we were
By
to,
the way, I should just mention that Eileen, I'm also a scientist.
oh, excellent, Eileen. So what number would you give faith, Eileen? What do you think Psi would, 0 to what? If we were to put faith back into Psi, how much would it?
I think that would be at least 85%.
85%. I think we might have a winner here in our analysis. How about meaning and purpose in life? 0 to what? If we were to put this back into Psi, does he believe in God because it gives him meaning and purpose?
I think that would be something. I don't know how much. 40, say 40%.
40?
Not so much that it gives Psi meaning and purpose, but that it provides meaning and purpose in general, not just for him as a person, but for humanity.
But Eileen, Psi would be a type of guy who could find meaning and purpose without God? Is that why it's only 40 and not 80?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, Eileen, here's a good one. Since you and me and Psi are all scientists, first cause, an explanation of why there's something rather than nothing. If we were to put this reason back into Psi, how much would his belief jump from 0 to what?
Oh, I would say 60 to 70%.
60 to 70. Okay.
We're way over 100 by now. But I guess that's
Well, we're doing it one at a time. So,
okay.
yeah. So you can almost have to view it, Eileen, as we're putting it in and then pulling it back out. We're testing it.
Got it.
So we have a control here.
So it's not cumulative. Okay.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
How about Sai's view of justice and fairness? Like he believes in God because he thinks there has to be some type of ultimate justice in the afterlife or something like that.
Yeah, I think that along with the previous one is is pretty important. So I would say 60% for that as well.
Okay. Now I got several left, but I'm just going to read them out, and you tell me, Eileen, if you think any of these would beat faith. Faith is number one right now.
Mm-hmm.
Fine-tuning argument.
Very important, but it doesn't beat faith.
Okay. Oh, guilt and shame, that there's a psychological need to believe in God because Sai either goofed up in his life, made mistakes, feels guilty about it, and believing in God helps him deal with that.
Not very much. A little, not zero.
Okay.
Maybe 10%.
Oh, here's a good one. Design. Look around the universe. It seems like it's designed. If we were to put this back into, would it beat faith?
No, it wouldn't beat faith, but it would be like the other pieces of evidence that you've mentioned, the fine-tuning, the first cause. Those are all, I would say, equivalent and important.
Morality. If we were to put back, does Sai believe because he feels there has to be this transcendent something out there to give us a basis for morality? And would that beat faith?
No, it would definitely not be faith, and I'm not sure that would be well, that's a complicated question. Eileen would certainly think that that's not very important because Eileen, have known Sai while he was an atheist and he was perfectly moral.
Okay.
So, as Eileen, I would say I don't think that's could be a very major issue.
Okay, so the rest are the rest are more about Jesus and not God, but let's leave Jesus alone for now.
Okay.
What about the idea of love and relationship? A lot of Christians, Eileen, have this relationship with Jesus and with God. Is the reason why Sai, if we were to put this need for love and relationship back into Sai, would that help him get his confidence up high enough to believe in God? Is that a major one?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
Again, Sai has always been someone who's had relationship and love with people, and the extension of that to God and Jesus is newer, but it isn't a requirement for him to believe. So maybe 30-40% most.
Okay, so let's bring, thank you, Eileen. Let's bring Sai back into the room.
Ah, phew.
How'd that feel?
Interesting.
Did you like that experiment?
It was challenging. I'm a terrible actor. I don't do well on portraying other people. So it was a challenge.
Do you understand why I did it, though?
Yes.
Yeah, it gives you a more of an objective way of just
Sure.
talking about yourself. But what we learned here from Eileen is that there's two main reasons why you became a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, this thing called faith, and number two, first cause. It seems like first cause and faith were the highest.
Mm-hmm.
So, as scientists, as people who value truth, and as people who want to have good reasons for believing what we believe and have reliable methods in coming to results,
Mm-hmm.
is faith, in the sense of believing something that without 100% proof,
Mm-hmm.
a good way of coming to a belief?
Okay, so there was one aspect of my belief in God that didn't make it onto the slip of paper.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
And that may be more specific to me and my own history than to everybody else, which is that the way I actually came to believe in Christ in a 2 or 3 step process. And the first step was to reject my initial belief system as incoherent. And that original belief system was strong atheism. So what happened was that I began to see very much in analogy to Christians who lose their faith because of reasoning and because of seeing contradictions and seeing things that don't make sense. I went through exactly the same process with anti-theism, with a belief, with a disbelief in God, a belief that God is not, cannot be real. And that process involved science, because when I started learning about science, and this is why some of the other things you mentioned, like first cause or the fine tuning argument, and some of the other arguments which really rely on scientific issues, that's why those have some importance, because what they did is they began to break down in various ways my initial belief in an extremely rational materialistic universe. The other, to give you just the other, from the other side, from the moral side or the social justice side, I also found some contradictions in what I was learning about the reality of the world. Because, for example, I was part of, left-wing youth groups and camps, and we used to sing Negro spirituals as, as a way to bond with the Negro struggle in the late 50s and early 60s for civil rights. And I noticed that all of these spirituals related to God and mentioned Jesus and mentioned things that I thought were untrue, and I couldn't understand that. And I was given explanations, of course, which were not very good, but I began to wonder, why is it that all of the civil rights leaders were Christians and pastors and deeply believed in God and Jesus Christ? And that there was a disconnect there, which bothered me. So from various angles, I began to lose my faith and belief in that type of worldview, that everything is materialistic, and that God is an evil presence in people's lives and a regressive presence. And I eventually rejected atheism, and I became someone, I guess these days you would say spiritual, but not religious. I believe in the transcendence. I began to think maybe there is something else besides what we see and what we can measure analytically. I didn't know what it was, and I didn't much care about it. And I stayed that way for a long time, decades. Just sort of, thinking, well, there's something else. I don't know what it is, but it's not all materialism. It's not all easily determined by scientific investigation. I rejected scientism very early, which is the idea that epistemology is only scientific. I rejected that. In fact, not only did I reject that, but I even heard atheists rejecting it who are scientists, because one thing about scientists is they know that there are some questions that we just don't answer, we don't address in science, which is fine. It's not supposed to. So that's where I stayed for a long time, and then had no faith. Okay, there was no faith involved. What happened was, through some other events, including my finally attending a church for the first time in my 40s, my late 40s. I'd never been to any place of worship before, except to hear a concert now and then. And I was completely surprised by what happened at the church. It was very different from what I expected. And I was brought there by a friend, and I wanted to go back. And I still didn't believe in any of this. I just thought it was comforting and nice for the people who were there. But that began a process that was quite slow, again, of thinking about the idea that maybe this other thing that's out there that I couldn't define, maybe it had something to do with what I was hearing about. And I looked into other religions. I was interested in Buddhism. I looked into Judaism. I even read a little bit about Islam, although not much. I was just curious as to what people believed and why they believed it. But when I read the Gospels, I was just struck by two things. First, something about reading all of the Gospels and then the book of Acts struck me as this is true. This is not made up.
Let's like you've said a lot already,
I
and
know. I'll stop. Sorry about
I
that.
appreciate what you said about you were a hard atheist. You said there is no God. You looked around at the world around you and you started seeing, but wait a minute, it seems like people who are not hard atheists maybe live better lives or are more compassionate and kind. You started seeing, the civil rights movement and so forth. I'm repeating back what you're saying just to show you that I'm listening and I'm understanding you. And then you started questioning, well, maybe there is something more than matter, something transcendent.
Hmm.
How did you go from this maybe there's something more to I believe strongly enough that I changed my life because of it? What convinced you that, yes, there is something other than atoms, electrons, protons, and neutrons, quarks, and all that?
Well, so that's two different questions. What convinced me that there was more than that was just what I was learning in physics to some extent, the uncertainty principle, the details of quantum mechanics, which I still don't understand, of course, because I don't think anybody does. There's a famous quote: "If you say you understand quantum mechanics, you don't." So anyway, um, and then I was studying biology and biochemistry. And as I got deeper into studying biology, I saw similar things. I saw things that just raised questions, in my mind. As one thing interesting about science is you never actually find the final answer to anything. As soon as you find an answer, okay, that's great. Now that's 12 more questions we've just raised.
Right.
You will publish the answer you just found, but now you got more research to do because of all these new questions. And I wondered why that was true. It seems kind of weird that should be true. At the end of the 19th century, there was some famous scientists who said, well, we're done. We've solved everything. Oops.
But do you think this is
and then Einstein came along with his pesky stuff.
like
Sorry.
I think it is human nature to want an answer.
Yeah.
I think it's very difficult for the average human being to proudly say, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, the average human being, that's true. But as you know, for scientists, that's required.
Yes,
You cannot be a scientist if you. Even my father, who was a chemist, also, by the way, and a strong atheist, always said, "It's not the answers that matter; it's the questions."
So
The answers are easy.
I guess my question is, you went from, okay, the world is just material, starting to question, well, maybe it isn't. How did you go from just being happy with, or why, you had two choices, I guess, maybe more than two, but you could have said, maybe there's something out there that's not material, it's another realm, God or whatever.
Right. Exactly.
But I don't know. I don't know.
Right. And that's what I said for a long time.
So what moved you from the I don't know to the I still don't know, but I'm confident enough that I believe this and will change the way I live my life?
Right. That was where faith came in, and how I got faith, how it came to me, was, as you probably heard many times from many people, a direct call from Jesus Christ to me. And I felt, once I heard the call and answered it and admitted to myself that I believed, I began to realize that I've been hearing, at least that call had been out there for a long time in my life, but I had never wanted to hear it. And it's kind of like when you're driving in a car and you have the radio on and you're lost and you don't know where you're going, and the radio suddenly starts playing beautiful music and you're not listening to it because you're lost and you're tense and you're trying to find out what to do. And then all of a sudden you realize, wait a minute, let me pull over for a minute. And you pull over and you listen to the music, and it's incredibly beautiful. And you say, how long has this music been playing? And that's how I felt when I finally did that.
So how did you just figure it out, though, that this was a direct call? Is this where
Well,
faith comes in?
I had a dream, which started it off, which I couldn't explain, where I actually had a direct experience with Jesus. It's not unusual. Many people talk about that. That got me really wondering what was going on. I didn't believe yet, but I started thinking about it harder. I started reading more about in the Bible and the Gospels. I started going to church more and listening. And at some point, I can tell you the story if you're interested. But at some point, I literally was driving in my car, and I pulled over, and I knew that I had become a believer in Christ because of what happened. And I started crying, and I was just completely emotional. And from then on, that was it. And
I
the
first
thing
of
about
all, first of all, I want to congratulate you for opening up like this. Like I've asked this question, these types of questions to a lot of believers, and they'll say they'll just leave it at personal experience.
right.
And so I commend you for being
Well,
vulnerable and
I'll be honest with you, Doug. I wouldn't do that with everyone, but I feel a sense of trust with you. I mean, it is a little difficult to open up about these very personal emotional experiences.
yeah.
I'm writing a book which is almost done. I hope to have it out at some point soon. And I debated whether I should include the details of these in the book, and I decided that I would. So at this point, I don't have any strong reservations about speaking about it. But one has to feel comfortable before you do that.
Yeah, I understand. I'm trying to figure out because we don't know each other. We just
Right.
met. And what you're talking about now is probably something that would change my life as well. Like people ask me, Doug, what would make you return to Christianity? It would have to be something. I typically say an amazing miracle, like muscle appearing out of thin air, or an amputee getting their limb back, something to that equivalent. But I do get that if I had a vision where I could actually touch something, smell something, see something, it's like, wait a minute, and nobody else can see it but me. But I'm having these experiences. I can understand how it would be next to impossible to convince me otherwise.
Hmm.
But
Okay.
you know, everything that we've been trained to do, more so you than me,
Yeah.
is to not trust our senses.
Right. Exactly. So it wasn't a sensory experience. It was a very unusual experience. I was driving on the Pennsylvania Turnpike in the middle of Pennsylvania, which is a very Christian fundamentalist area. And I turned on the radio because I was very tired, and I heard one of the preachers who, populate the airwaves there. And I never could stand to hear these preachers talk about their stuff. I just always would turn them off. But this time I didn't turn it off. And the reason was I realized this guy was really eloquent. I didn't really agree with or believe what he was saying, but he was speaking with this beautiful voice and well modulated, and his diction was perfect. And I wasn't actually listening to what he was saying, but I turned it off at some point, and I said, "Boy, these guys can really talk. It's really amazing." And then I thought to myself, what would I do if I were preaching a sermon? Something I'd never thought about. And I started preaching a sermon to myself. And what the sermon was I said to myself, I pictured myself preaching in front of a large crowd of Christian believers, somewhere maybe in the South, okay, fundamentalists. And what I said in the sermon was, here I am standing before you, and I'm an atheist, communist New Yorker. And yet I'm preaching before all of you good Southern Christians because God loves me. And if God loves me, who could he not love? And I just said that to myself from nowhere. And when I said it, I had to pull over and burst into tears because I realized it was true.
Can I ask, this is a very personal question, but what was happening in your life during this time? Like, was there a major life event going on?
Not really. No. Not unrelated. I mean, nothing that was unrelated to my, thinking about faith or thinking about religion. I really, let's see, I was in my early 50s, late 40s, early 50s. I don't remember exactly, probably early 50s. I was a professor at the University of Pittsburgh, and I was driving from New York back to Pittsburgh.
Because
This happened.
because if you and I were, let's say you were still an atheist, you and I are two atheists, and we probably wouldn't even have any inkling, any desire to look into Hinduism.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't even cross our mind, really. Maybe as an academic exercise or something like
Well, I
that.
did actually. I did at some point.
I know, but what I'm getting at is there has to be that push, that reason
Yeah,
to even want to look into it.
yeah, and that was probably because, to some extent, it was a Christian preacher who I heard speaking, and I had been reading the Gospels, and I had been going to a Christian church. I had not had the only experiences I'd had with other religions were not terribly interesting to me. They didn't
Yeah.
affect me in that way. What affected me about Christianity was the person of Jesus Christ. That a man appeared on earth who was God incarnate and did what he did and said what he said and all the rest.
Yeah, there's there's something called the outsider test of faith. I don't know if you've heard of it, but its its purpose is to see if your reasons would hold up from a different perspective. So, for example, let's say you were born and raised in Pakistan,
Mm-hmm.
and you're an atheist, and you managed to stay alive.
Mm-hmm.
But you're starting to think about transcendence, something called the immaterial,
Mm-hmm.
and you hear this imam,
Mm-hmm.
speak on the radio, and just
Mm-hmm.
the eloquence. And
Yeah.
you go into a mosque, and the music is just beautiful, and it touches your life. And it causes you to see the world in a new way, feel the world in a new way, and it to the point where you just pull over on your car and weep.
Yeah.
And so
That could happen.
yeah, and I'm sure it has happened many times. So the question, though, is, as valuers of truth, as you and I scientists, looking at, okay, these are great experiences. We're not taking anything away from those experiences. Those experiences are phenomenal and can
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of meaning. But the real question is the truth behind what we attribute it to.
Remember that the very first question you asked me, or
Yes.
you asked Eileen, was does Cy think that it's true or does he believe it?
Yeah.
And my answer was he believes it. And I do not, I will not debate a Muslim or a Hindu or any other religious person about which religion is true because I don't know. And I don't think it's the right question. Uh, I don't know what truth is. Truth is something that I believe we'll discover, not in this world or never. If you think there's no other world, I believe some things are true, and those are demonstrable scientifically, and those are interesting. I recently read a quote, and I wish I could remember who it was. It was somebody famous who said, uh, "The things we can prove are shallow truths.
Yeah.
The really deep truths are we're not provable." And so I would not say that I did hear your interview with, I think it's John McLatchie,
Yeah.
recently, and you were surprised, and I was surprised that he was really focusing on evidence for Christianity and not. I'm the opposite. Okay, I believe there is evidence for Christianity. I wouldn't be a Christian if I really thought there was some chance that Christ never lived or that there was no resurrection. But that's not what I base it on. I base it on my faith and my belief. And so I agree that a Pakistani who suddenly saw the light of Islam because he was surrounded by that, sure, that can happen, and that doesn't mean that Christianity is not true or that Islam is not true. We don't know what is true, and I do believe for real that there is a God that we can't understand, and I think that that's why Christianity was so appealing to me. Is that in Christianity, God had mercy on us and came to earth in the form of a man to tell us what to do, how to live, how to be. And his message was revolutionary at the time, and it still is. Love your enemy, love your neighbor as yourself. Who can do that? His messages were incredible, and they testify to the fact that Jesus Christ was God. And I find that very appealing rather than the various religions where there is a God, but he's off very far away from anything we can understand.
But you're not saying that, just because it's appealing doesn't make it true. Like it's.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about truth.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think it's true. I believe it's true. I would never demonstrate that it's true or try to demonstrate that it's true. I even wrote a story, which is kind of a funny fable, about what would happen if God actually proved his existence. Okay, let's say right tomorrow, God came down in a spaceship of some kind, and he was clearly God because he started doing miracles all over the place, and he spoke in everyone's language, and there was no question that this was actually God. Okay, in my fable, he looks like Morgan Freeman, and people, what would happen? It would be, well, God is real. Okay, there's a God. It's proven. Can't deny it. Now what? You think a lot of people go to church? I mean, the IRS is real, right? We can't not believe in the IRS. It's a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anyone who worships the IRS. I don't know anyone who has a sense of deep faith and joy at the existence of the IRS. Or anything that's demonstrably true. It's a fact. It's nice. It's a fact. It's real.
Well,
But the idea of proving God to me makes no sense.
Yeah, and I very rarely use the word prove. Almost never.
You're a scientist. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I'm going to lay all my cards out on the table here. The reason why I have this channel and do what I do is because I think truth does matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I define truth as all those things learned by reliable methods. That hopefully reflects reality, but sometimes it doesn't. Something 10,000 years ago, Homo sapiens thought the Earth was flat, probably, and that wasn't true. So, so to me, it's the methods of how we arrive at this thing called knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciate you saying that. You're not saying that what you believe is 100% true and that you're certain it's true, but you believe it is by faith.
Right.
And I respect that. I think that when someone, like yourself, can say, you know what, I could be wrong about this, it helps conjure up humility. And the opposite is dangerous. If someone says, I'm certain this is true, it conjures up arrogance and violence sometimes. So this is why I do what I do. But as me an atheist and you're a Christian, and we mentioned that Muslim and there's a Hindu out there. If I'm a truth seeker and I'm trying to figure out what is actually real, not just what makes me feel good, not just what gives me meaning and purpose, not just
I
what
understand.
helps, all that stuff, good stuff. All that stuff is good. But if I
Right.
really want to know what's real,
Hmm.
it seems to me you're in the same boat as the Muslim, as the Hindu, as the Buddhist, who uses faith as a reason.
Well, we're all in the same boat. For most of what we can tell is real. I've worked with Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and Buddhist scientists, and no religion comes in, as you well know. When you're doing an experiment and you're titrating something, it doesn't matter what you believe in religion,
Right.
right? The titration will either be right or wrong. I mean, you'll either get the right value for the acidity or whatever you're measuring, or you won't. And that's true for science. And it's, in fact, what I like to say is that I don't believe in God because of what we don't know yet, the God of the gaps. I believe in God because of what we do know. What I have seen from what physics, cosmology, even some aspects of quantum mechanics and particle physics, what the Heisenberg uncertainty principle tells me is that scientifically there are things we cannot know. Okay, we cannot know the momentum and the position of an electron at the same time. Research will not answer that question. That is a known unknown. I think there are many of those. And as we go deeper into biology, I think we're going to start hitting some of those as well. And what that doesn't mean that God is there. What it means is that what you're saying is it would be great to know that something is really true or not really true. But the problem is we can't do that. We can do it a lot. Okay. We owe our modern civilization to how much we are able to do that. But we can't do it for everything.
Right. And I agree. It's an asymptote, right? Like here's truth of,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
We'll never quite hit 100% truth,
I
no
agree
matter
with
how
that.
far we go.
I agree with that. I guess for me, and maybe you can tell me why you're not like me, I rather say I'm comfortable with the uncertainty.
Okay.
I'm comfortable with saying I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't bother me. I'm self-employed. My cash flow is extremely lumpy. Doesn't bother me. Most people, they would freak out. Like they need to know, oh, I got this paycheck to the penny. Like, I mean, I'm okay with uncertainty. And so maybe it's just a personality type. I don't know that certain personality types tend to believe and other personality types don't. But I guess for you, especially with your scientific background, why sort of put them in different categories?
Yeah, that's a
Like,
good question. It's a good question. And I don't know if I have a great answer because I am like you. I like to know as much as I can, and I'm fine with uncertainty. And so what I have to do to explain it is get away from the whole issue of knowing and into the issue of feeling just for a minute. We can leave it after that. But what I will tell you is when I got through crying that moment in my car from joy, the joy has never left me since then. And when I go to church, and I go every Sunday, and almost every time I walk into that church, something inside me says, "What are you doing here? You don't belong here. You don't believe this stuff. You're a scientist, you're a rationalist." And I sit in the church, and the music starts, and people start greeting each other, and the pastor begins to speak. By the time I walk out, the joy is back. And that's a feeling that I've never had before.
mm-hmm.
And I know in that sense, all right, not in the objective, verifiable, evidentiary sense, but I know in my soul that God is real and that Christ loves me. And, that's a feeling that I would not be able to give up at this point
Yeah,
for any reason.
I'll even use the word sick. In a sick way, I envy you because,
No, I understand that.
yeah,
I was there a long time. I envy people. I used to say, I wish I could believe in that nonsense.
Yes,
Look how
yes.
happy they are.
But here's the encouragement that I want to leave with you, and we should wrap this up. We've been an hour.
Yes, yeah, we should.
My this is so funny that we're so similar and so different in so many ways. My life has gotten more joyful, in the sense that I agree with you that I've lost community, and that's what I talk about, the envy, the community part. Atheists are horrible at community. And the reason for that is because there is nothing to atheism. It's just
Right.
there's no creeds. You can have
That's
a
right.
far left wing atheist, a far right wing atheist. It does,
Yeah.
so, so the community aspect is a huge issue. But as far as, I honestly feel like I'm a better father, a better husband, a better friend once I left Christianity. And maybe it was because I had the wrong Christianity. That's fine, I'll grant that. But I really don't think that I would become better at those things if I returned to Christianity. In other words, I don't need it.
Right.
I don't need it on a practical sense.
I understand that. I don't think I was a bad husband or father as an atheist, and I'm not sure I'm any better now as a Christian. And I will never agree with people who say that you can't be moral unless you
Yeah.
believe in God. Because the evidence is against it. I was a moral person. You're a moral person. There are plenty of moral atheists. So I understand that. I do think, however, that perhaps your experience with Christianity was unfortunate, and mine was probably very fortunate. If I had walked into a church, which I expected to happen when I first went to a Catholic church, and the priest had begun thundering about sinners who, will go to hell, I wouldn't be talking to you today. I wouldn't be here. I mean, I would have walked out and never gone back. That's what I was afraid was going to happen. But that's not what happened. He talked about love, only love, love between people, love between God and man. And I had learned about the horrors of the Catholic Church and the Inquisition and everything. And where was this coming from? I didn't understand it. And that was the first sign.
You remember early on in the conversation, I talked about evolution, and I asked you the question: have you ever met someone who accepted evolution, but then became a young Earth creationist? And you said no, but you might have kind of bumped into one or two, and I have.
Possible, yeah.
Is there a chance that you are like that person who accepted evolution as true and left and adopted young Earth creationism because of social pressures, because of...
No. The social pressures for me were extremely against my becoming a Christian. I worked in a scientific environment in academia. I was a secret Christian.
Okay.
For almost until I retired. There were no social pressures for me to become Christian.
So is more the pressure, would it be self-inflicted pressure though?
No.
No?
When I told my friend Eileen, the real person, that I was Christian, she was very polite, looked at me for a few minutes and said, okay. And then we had a little bit of a discussion. We've never talked about it again.
Still friends?
And that scene has repeated itself over and over. Almost all the scientists that I worked with were atheists and remain atheists. Academia is not friendly to Christianity in general.
Yeah.
So no, social pressure was not part of it.
Okay.
Just the opposite.
Yeah, because I have a theory that when people become Christians or theists later in life, like I think coming into belief is different than leaving belief, in the sense that coming to belief is almost like you're grabbing onto something. Leaving a belief system is you just letting go. I
had to let go. Yeah, I understand that. And I think that's often true. I don't feel it was true in my case, and I also had to let go of a lot.
Yeah. And please don't take offense to this, but I see this so often that when people are believers from the ages of 1 to 22 or 25 in that area, it's because of indoctrination usually.
Mm-hmm.
It's the way they were raised. And that's probably why, Jesus makes sense to you and me in the sense of personal relationship and so forth. But to a Muslim or a Hindu, it's like, what? A God coming down as man? How ridiculous is that?
Oh, yeah. Sure.
But then from age 25 to, older than that, I think it's more of a psychological desperation. I don't know how many people I've talked to that have had addictions, gone through bankruptcies, divorce, death, some type of tragedy. There's some need that needs to be filled psychologically,
Right.
and that's what
Right.
pushes them into the belief. So it's
I've seen
indoctrination.
that too.
Yeah,
I've seen that, but that is not the case with me.
yeah. And then I apply
I didn't
that.
have
I,
any.
I apply that same standard to myself. Was it desperation that got me out of Christianity?
Hmm. Hmm.
Again, we're very similar. Like people assume that, oh, poor those Christians treated Doug so horribly, he left the church, and that's why he's an atheist. Doug, who hurt you? Show me on the doll where they touched you. No, that's not the case. But anyhow, it was really good talking with you.
Yes, I enjoyed it.
I think I understood. I understand where you're coming from, and hopefully you understand a little bit about where I'm coming from.
Hmm.
And yeah, we're definitely very similar and yet very different in a lot of ways. So
Well, it's always good to have a conversation that is civil and respectful, and where both people listen. And so I appreciate that, and I thank you for that.
okay, well, you have a great day, and maybe we'll do this again sometime.
You too. All right. Terrific.
Take care.
Bye bye.
And everybody in chat, thank you so much for showing up on Tuesday morning, and we'll see you next time.